Stop and think about life for a moment. What makes or breaks us? When we are about to lose everything, what matters then? Or when we're about to die or a loved one is facing death, what matters more than anything else? People, relationships. We are made for relationships. When God created the universe and all of the animals and man, there was still something missing. He had no one to be his helper, to be his complement, to help complete his life. So God created Eve, thankfully. And Adam and Eve fellowshiped easily and regularly with God. They had a close, ongoing relationship with God until they sinned. Relationships with God and with one another became difficult after their sin, but they've never stopped being paramount. Thus, the two greatest commandments, to love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. Larry Crabb said relationships define our lives with God and with people. Our lives are defined by those relationships. And because relationships are so important, they can break us and they can make us. And since all of us are damaged as fallen people living in a fallen, sinful world with other fallen people, we all need healing. And relationships with God and people are necessary for that healing. But what is necessary in order for that relationship to heal someone? For a relationship to heal, it must be safe. John Gottman said the most important factor of the marriage relationship is safety. I like to define love as the unselfish and sacrificial commitment to the good of the other person. I get that definition from scriptures like John 3:16, Philippians chapter 2, where Jesus stepped out of heaven into this world to become a man like us and to die for us. And then he tells us to have that same attitude toward others, to be unselfish. You know, God is love. Therefore, he is sacrificially committed to our good. Sometimes this love might have to be tough or corrective because that is what is best for the person that we love or that loves us. Tough or soft love is always genuinely committed to the good of the person loved. Let's look at an illustration of why I say relationships must be safe. Several years ago, I listened to Les and Leslie Parrott, Christian counselors, and they talked about a story. Now, haven't been able to find the story again, so I hope I do justice to it and don't misrepresent them, but I think the core idea you will get. Leslie was asked to speak at a conference in town one night, and she didn't really want to go. She wanted to be at home with her family, but she kept her obligation, and she went to keep the speaking engagement. On her way home, she was on the interstate, and she got behind her husband's car, and she said, "That's cool, follow him home." And she blew the horn and flashed her lights, and he speeded up. And then she realized that her car was in the shop being repaired, and she was in a loaner car, and he did not recognize who was behind him. She thought that was pretty cool and somewhat funny that he was afraid of her. So she just kept blowing the horn and flashing her lights, and he kept trying to get away from her. He went off the exit, and she said, "Well, he couldn't get away from me because I knew where he lived." But he drove past their driveway and then drove into a police station. And he said he had this club or stick or something in his car, and he said, "I don't know who that jerk is behind me, but whoever it is, if they want a piece of me, I'll give it to them now." And he grabbed that, and he marched back there, and there was his wife laughing. She said he didn't laugh. As a matter of fact, we had a quiet evening that night. But she said she got to thinking about that event and what happened in their relationship at other times. And when we don't feel safe, or in her case, when one of them did not feel safe, then they did the same thing. They either would flee, fight, or freeze. So we need to be safe. A good relationship will not always feel safe because resolving problems kick us out of our comfort zones. and they expose our own failures and weaknesses, and it makes us feel very vulnerable. But we need to be safe enough to remove the walls that block intimacy, safe enough to be willing to bridge the distance that divides in relationships. We become safe in our relationships when we are unselfishly and sacrificially committed to each other's good. Now, safety does not require agreement, but we are safe when we do our best to understand one another and at the very least respectfully try. We do this by active listening. Now, what is active listening? It's that rare event when you're talking with somebody and they tune into you so much that it almost makes you uncomfortable. You wonder what's going on. They lean forward, they look you in the eye, and they make you know that what you're saying is extremely important to them because you're extremely important to them, and you love it. We ought to be doing that in our close relationships. We should be communicating with that gift that we really want to hear and understand. And by the way, the difference between satisfying and unsatisfying marriages is simply that those that are satisfied and healthy, they resolve their differences. Every marriage has differences. You either do not resolve them and it puts distance between you, or you resolve them and you increase the intimacy in your home. Great marriages and relationships are built when we are genuinely interested and committed to edifying one another, building up one another. We do much better when we seek to understand the other person than to win an argument. You know, remember this, in any relationship, especially in marriage, if only one person wins, nobody wins. Only when we feel safe will we risk getting close to someone or becoming intimate. The word intimacy comes from a Latin word intima, which means innermost or most secret. Every person has an intima. And when that most personal and vulnerable world is shared with another person, a true, deep, intimate relationship develops. It's often been said that intimacy is simply into me see. It's when you allow somebody to see into your most personal world, and they allow you into their most personal world. That's a high honor. It's not always comfortable, but it's a high honor. My personal definition of intimacy is knowing and being known in a trusting and valuing relationship. But here's what relationships bring healing to us. Intimacy with God. We have to be completely vulnerable to God. We can trust Him. He is safe. We have to be intimate with our spouses, to be safe enough to be genuine and real, and with our children. Our children need to be safe with mom and dad, so that when they share, that they will share with them during those difficult times that they maneuver through, when they're asking questions and they're very confused, they need to be safe enough to talk to mom and dad about it. And parents parent better when we feel safe and fulfilled in our relationships with God and with others. So we all need relationships where we know we are safe enough to let one another into our personal world, into our hearts, into our intima. Let me give you some marriage counseling in a nutshell. I had somebody asking me once to do premarital counseling when her fiancé lived hundreds of miles away. And I kept saying, I can't do premarital counseling with you with only one person. Now, this was back in the old days when we didn't have the privilege of doing this virtually. And so I would just tease her and say things to put her off. And then I walked through her office one day and she said, hey, I'm serious. I'm getting married and I need some counseling. I thought, whoa. And I said, well, I am going to a meeting right now. I'll talk to you when I get back. And I walked out of the office and I thought, and I stepped back in and I said, remember this. Always treat him to where he knows he is the most important person in the world to you, and you'll do well. And I walked out and I thought, wow, when I don't take time to think about things, sometimes I actually say something that's pretty good, and that was pretty good. And that's true. We are to give value to people. And in a marriage or even other close relationships, we need to let them know that they are important to us. This is true for all close relationships. I hope you see that letting your other close relationships know how important they are will also build healthy and healing relationships. Whether it's with God, who clearly is the most important one in our life, or our husband or wife, who is the most important person on earth to you, or our valuable children. Valuing others applies to all close relationships, whether it's family, friendships, and even, and listen, church families. How would this change our churches if we treated others with the value that they should have? You know, that's what grace does. Grace values us more than we deserve. We should value other people. This will save us from our own selfishness. Selfishness always makes us smaller than what God's plan is for us. Love that is unselfish will build us up, and it will build up those that we love. Builds up those who love and those who are loved. It is as though love breathes life into others. We see this in Ephesians chapter 5, where Jesus compares his relationship with the church to the husband and wife. The husband is committed to the good of the wife like Jesus is committed to being the Savior of the church. That sounds pretty safe. Wives can and should feel safe enough to submit to the husband like we do to Jesus, our Savior. This safety is only possible when you trust the Savior. Husbands are to love wives with the unselfish commitment to them that Jesus gives to us. That's certainly true safety. And Jesus did all of this to make his spouse all that she could be so that we, the church, could be presented to him in splendor, without spot, without wrinkle, or any such thing, holy and without blemish. They commit to one another by leaving father and mother and cleaving to one another. They will do life together. They don't quit. They're committed. And that pattern of love will serve all of the commitments, and these relationships will provide redemptive healing because they are moved by God's love and grace. So, like Gary Thomas said, the goal of marriage is first of all to make us holy. That is what we should seek even before happiness. But don't worry, holiness and happiness are very compatible. You know, every relationship is actually a gospel relationship to do the work of God. Every relationship is for God's glory. Yes, relationships define our lives. What story are we writing in our relationships? What good story can we write in our relationships? Are we communicating the value, the grace, the attentiveness, that active listening? Are we providing that safety in our homes, our marriages, with our children, in our churches, that will honor God and glorify him? Let's be sure we write a good story and be safe.